A constant gnawing of loneliness is an overwhelming memory Ramona Charette Klein lives with nearly 70 years later.
I remember looking out that frosted cold window, yearning to see my parents, thinking, maybe tomorrow I will see Mama and Daddy. It didn't come. It didn't come.
Her parents were miles away from Charette Klein and many of her siblings when they attended what was then known as an Indian boarding school.
I was among strangers. I was scared. I remember hearing other kids cry at night.
Klein grew up in North Dakota, a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of the Chippewa tribe. Her family was poor, 10 people sharing 2 rooms. When she was 7, she was sent to the Fort Totten Indian boarding school, 150 miles away. She doesn't know if her mom was forced to send her there or felt she just didn't have any other choice.
If your children are hungry, I don't know if you could even call that having a choice.
Indian boarding schools were often touted as a vehicle for indigenous children to achieve a better life. In reality, many found anything but. Charette Klein learned that when she arrived in 1954 and was forced to undress and get a haircut.
I believe they made the assumption that I had head lice and fine-combed my head with the kerosene.
She says at Fort Totten she was constantly hungry. She was also beaten.
There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. That was lonely.
The federal government ran Indian boarding schools for 150 years until 1969. One of the goals, as described by one of the founders, was to kill the Indian and save the man. It was cultural assimilation. Some children had to change their name and do manual labor, and some were abused.
To me, it's like dehumanizing.
Myrtle Driver Johnson attended Haskell Indian Institute in Kansas for 5 years in the 1950s and 60s after growing up an orphan in Cherokee, North Carolina. The Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians is located here. Her experience was different from Charette Klein's. She says that on balance, it was positive. But she says the school discouraged her from speaking Cherokee, her native language. In her own way, she resisted.
When her back was turned, I spoke Cherokee again. Kiss my ass, I'm going to talk my language. You know, that's mine.
Many children, though, ended up losing their native language.
The long-term impact of that was that the Cherokee language almost disappeared here in this part of North Carolina. The community is trying to bring it back.
This is Bo Lasia, speaking Cherokee. He works at the New Kidawah Academy in Cherokee, North Carolina. The school teaches English and Cherokee. One of the reasons the school started was because the number of people locally speaking Cherokee fell to just around 400, according to Lasia.
If you don't have the people here to share with you where this come from, why this is important, it gives you no sense of being of where you are, who you are.
I could be a very determined person.
Charette Klein knew who she was before she even reached the age of 10, refusing to cry when she was beat.
That determined child got me to where I am today, because I won't let them take my dignity. I just won't.
Which brings us to why she's outside the nation's capital. The same day we spoke with her, the now PhD holder testified before Congress.
Being in that boarding school was the loneliest time of my life. It has made it difficult for me to trust other people, including people on this committee.
The person the federal government once tried to quiet is now speaking louder than ever. The headstones in Carlisle, Pennsylvania give a glimpse into a town's dark past. The dates of death came all too early, graves marking a child that spent little time on Earth.
It's a forgotten piece of history, and glossed over for sure.
More than 150 children lie in the Carlisle Barracks Post Cemetery. Many of them were students at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, which closed in 1918. Many children died from diseases like tuberculosis. The one commonality is they never returned home.
He is so beautiful. Oh, God, it brings tears to my eyes.
Loretta Webster is the cousin of Paul Wheelock. In 1900, Paul died at 10 months old. At the time, the school said he took a severe cold, which settled in his throat and lungs, from which he slowly pined away. This is the only known photo of him. Kara Artman is another cousin of Paul's.
He was a beloved child who was born here by parents who got a lot out of Carlisle and found the benefits of Carlisle.
Paul was too young to be a student. He was the son of Dennison Wheelock, who was a graduate of Carlisle and the school's highly accomplished band leader.
Dennison actually went on to become a lawyer and a leader in the community and went so far as to even argue a case before the Supreme Court.
While Paul was thought to have a positive experience in his short life at Carlisle, many children coming from tribes around the country did not.
The Carlisle Indian Industrial School was located here on what is now the idyllic campus of the U.S. Army's War College. This building that now houses college leadership was built by indigenous children, like the ones in this photo taken on campus decades ago.
You look at the ages of these students. How scary did this have to be for them?
Oh, terrifying. And to be put into kind of identical clothing, having their hair cut, or just removed from everything, would have been scary.
The goal of Carlisle, which became the model for Indian boarding schools around the world, was even scarier. Kill the Indian, save the man, was how the founder of Carlisle, Richard Pratt, described it. He made a convincing argument to families to send their children to the school.
If you want your children to do better than you did, they need to know English. They need to be able to fight back and to defend their cultures.
Kara Curtis is the archives director at the Cumberland County Historical Society and says many students had success stories at Carlisle. The school had a nationally known athletic program. Its most well-known graduate was Jim Thorpe.
He's an insanely good athlete. Modern football is basically created at the Carlisle Indian School.
But while there was triumph, there was also much pain. Curtis says children were forced to do manual labor, were physically abused, and were prohibited from speaking their native language. While some students were sent to the school by their families, others were forced to attend by the federal government. Some students didn't see their families for years.
What should Carlisle be remembered as?
It helped develop this policy of cultural genocide and harm to students, and we have to come to terms with that history as a local population, but as a nation and world as well.
A reckoning.
A reckoning, yeah, for sure.
The reckoning process is underway at Carlisle. This is the 5th summer the Office of Army Cemeteries has disinterred the remains of children and returned them to their tribes. Families from around the country come to Pennsylvania to take part in a ceremony before returning with their family members' remains.
I think Dennison and his wife probably were looking down and very happy about it.
122 years after his death, Paul Wheelock is at the Oneida tribe in Wisconsin, buried on land where his family lives, a family that did not even know he existed until a few years ago.
There are going to be some people who watch this and say, is it too late? Did this come too late?
No, it's not for us, not for our family. No, it's not too late at all. It's never too late to return a child home to their homeland.
It is a history that we must learn from if we are to heal.
It's a remarkable moment. The country's first Native American cabinet-level secretary testifying before Congress about a time when the department she now oversees ran a school system that removed Native American children from their families and communities to strip them of their culture and supposedly civilize them.
This intentional targeting and removal of Native children to achieve the goal of forced assimilation was both traumatic and violent.
For 150 years until the 1960s, the federal government ran what were known as Indian boarding schools. Some students prospered. Others did not. Students often were forced to cut their hair, given new Americanized names, and encouraged to speak English instead of their native languages. Punishment could be harsh. Some were forced to go without food.
The consequences of federal Indian boarding school policies were inflicted on generations of children, some as young as 4.
After hundreds of potential graves at former residential schools in Canada were discovered last year, the Department of Interior, under the Biden administration, launched an investigation into the U.S. schools. In the first part of its investigative report released in May, the department found 408 schools run by the federal government from 1819 to 1969. The report found the government collaborated with churches to Christianize schools. It also found numerous marked and unmarked burial sites at schools with the remains of at least 500 children. The department made a series of recommendations, from identifying the number of burial sites to creating a federal memorial to helping revitalize native languages. But it may not end there.
We can't change our history, but we need to understand it.
Democrat Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts is pushing for legislation to create a healing commission that would document what happened and acknowledge injustices by the federal government.
And describe how, as a government, we're going to do what we can to make this right.
You're changed once you hear the truth.
Sandy Whitehawk is the president of the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. While the coalition is pushing for an apology from the government and the church, Whitehawk says it needs to be more than that.
Anytime you say you're sorry about something, then you have to change what brought you to the point where you had to apologize.
In Canada this week, Pope Francis did meet with Native American communities and issued an apology.
I humbly beg forgiveness.
In the U.S., Secretary Holland is on a listening tour around the country, meeting with survivors and descendants of the federal Indian boarding school system. The Healing Commission legislation also continues to be pushed by lawmakers, but it's not an overnight fix.
We have a lot of pain in our communities, but it's expressed in addiction and other ways of medicating and behaviors that are destructive. And the person ends up they always end up hurting themselves for sure, but definitely families and communities suffer as well.
A legacy that's lived on generations and just now is being addressed. In Washington, Reuben Jones, Spectrum News.